in the stillness of the night, where unseen eyes watch. Welcome to Classic Storytime Hub. Tonight we descend into a reimagined retelling of The Eyes of the Panther by Ambrose Bierce, brought back to life with a suspenseful new voice.
The two of them sat together on a weathered wooden bench as the late afternoon light bled into gold. Nature itself seemed to have paired them. The man, lean, dark-skinned, with the thoughtful air of a poet but the dangerous complexion of a corsair, was the kind of figure one could not glance at just once. Beside him, the woman, young, fair-haired, her movements supple and feline, wore a gray dress streaked with curious brown patterns. Her beauty was uncertain, for her eyes eclipsed everything else. Long, narrow, gray-green eyes that unsettled the soul. Eyes that might have belonged to Cleopatra herself. They spoke in low voices. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I love you. God knows I do. But marry you? Never. I cannot. I will not." The man's jaw tightened. "Irene, you've told me this again and again, yet you've never given me a reason. I have the right to know, to understand, to test my strength against the truth. Give me that much." "For loving you?" she asked, a fragile smile breaking through her pale face, though tears glistened in her eyes. "No," he snapped. "Love needs no reason, but your refusal, your endless refusal, demands one. I must know. I will know." He rose abruptly, fists clenched, his brow furrowed into something close to a scowl. For a moment he looked as though he might seize the answer from her by force. Yet she did not flinch. She only gazed up at him with that same unblinking stare, cold, fixed, and strangely powerful. It drained the anger from him, leaving only a shiver. "You truly want my reason?" she asked, her voice flat, mechanical, as though her gaze itself had found sound. "Yes," he said, his tone softening, "if it is not too much to ask." The balance between them shifted. The master of the moment was no longer the man. "Very well," she said at last. "You shall know. I am insane." He recoiled, startled. His first instinct was disbelief, even amusement, but the laughter never came. Something in her words, or perhaps in her eyes, struck deeper than reason. His mind rejected it, but his heart trembled. "That," she continued, her voice steady, "is what the physicians would call it, if they knew. But I prefer another word, possession. Sit, and I will tell you everything."
The man lowered himself back onto the rough wooden bench, the silence between them heavy as the valley darkened. Across the eastern ridge, the hills glowed with the last fire of the setting sun, and the hush that settled over the land carried the weight of an omen. Twilight was coming, not only to the sky, but to the spirit. Jenner Brading, uneasy beneath Irene Marlowe's unblinking gaze, listened without a word. Her eyes, beautiful, yes, but disturbingly feline, always stirred in him a dread he could neither name nor master. And so, when she began her tale, he sat still, compelled. The story she told was not her own voice alone. It was as though another presence spoke through her. Far away in time, in a lonely log cabin deep in the wilderness, a young woman crouched against the wall, clutching her infant to her chest. The room was bare, a single chamber, swallowed in darkness. Outside, the forest stretched endlessly in every direction, a suffocating sea of trees. Though no human eye could pierce that blackness, the woman and her child were being watched, closely, relentlessly, by something that never looked away. That watchfulness, unseen yet undeniable, is the very heart of this tale. The husband, Charles Marlowe, was one of the old breed of pioneers, men who carved their lives out of the wild with axe and rifle, pushing ever westward into the forests that cloaked the Mississippi Valley. For generations, such men had advanced, clearing patches of land only to abandon them to more cautious settlers, until at last they vanished into the open plains like shadows falling off the edge of the world. Charles had brought with him into this harsh solitude his wife and their child. To them he was fiercely devoted, for in his world the family bond was sacred. His wife, still young and fair, bore the isolation with a kind of quiet courage. She had her small household tasks, her child, her husband, and a few worn books, simple things, yet enough to sustain her spirit. Heaven, in its mercy, had not burdened her with a hunger for greater joys than the wilderness could provide. But in that cabin, on that night, with the forest pressing close and unseen eyes fixed upon her, the fragile peace of her life was about to shatter.
One midsummer morning, Charles Marlowe lifted his rifle from its hooks on the cabin wall, announcing his intent to hunt. His wife, pale with unease, pleaded softly, "We have enough meat. Please don't go today. I dreamed something dreadful last night. I cannot recall it clearly, but I feel certain it will come true if you leave." Marlowe only laughed, brushing aside her fear. "Perhaps you dreamed the baby had lost her voice," he teased, glancing at the child tugging at his coat and babbling joyfully at the sight of his raccoon skin cap. Unable to resist his gentle humor, the woman relented. He kissed her, kissed the child, and stepped out into the wilderness, closing the door on his happiness forever. Night fell. He did not return. She prepared supper, waited, then laid the baby to sleep with a lullaby. The fire on the hearth died to ash, leaving only a single candle. She placed it in the window, a beacon for her husband, should he come from that side. The door she barred against prowling beasts, though she never imagined they might enter by other ways. As the hours dragged on, her worry deepened, but her body grew heavy with fatigue. At last she rested her head beside the child's bed and drifted into uneasy sleep. The candle sputtered, flared, and died, leaving the cabin in darkness. And she dreamed. In her vision, she sat beside a cradle, but not the one she knew. Her first child was gone. Her husband was gone. The forest home had vanished, replaced by a strange stone dwelling with barred windows and heavy oak doors. She felt an aching sorrow, yet no surprise, for dreams know nothing of astonishment. Something compelled her to lift the coverlet from the cradle. Beneath it was no child at all, but the snarling face of a wild beast. With a cry she awoke, shaking in the black silence of the cabin, the forest pressing close around her. Slowly, reality crept back into her mind. She reached for the child, real, breathing, warm, and her hand brushed across its tiny face in reassurance. Yet some unexplainable impulse urged her to lift the sleeping infant into her arms, pressing it tightly against her breast. She turned, her back now against the wall where the cradle had stood, and then she saw them. 2 points of light, burning in the darkness, red and green like embers alive with malice. At first she thought them coals on the hearth, but no, they were too high, level with her own eyes, and in that instant of dreadful clarity she knew. They were the eyes of a panther. The beast stood at the open window, scarcely 5 paces away. Only its eyes betrayed its presence, but she felt its posture, upright, hind legs braced, forepaws gripping the sill. This was no idle curiosity. This was hunger, intent.
malice. Those eyes held her fast. Their steady, merciless fire drained her strength, hollowed her courage. Her body trembled, her stomach turned to ice. Slowly, carefully, she sank to the floor, cradling the child beneath her, trying to shield it with her own frail body. She dared not look away, dared not move too quickly for fear the beast would spring. Her mind shrank to a single, suffocating terror. The leap, the crushing weight, the tearing claws, the teeth at her throat, the child ripped from her arms. She thought of nothing else. Not her absent husband, not rescue, not escape. Only the waiting. Endless, unbearable waiting. Time stretched into eternity as those infernal eyes glowed in the dark, unblinking, patient, and merciless. Late that night, Charles Marlowe returned through the forest, a deer slung across his shoulders. When he reached the cabin, he tried the door. It was barred. He knocked, but no answer came. Setting down his burden, he circled the house. As he turned the corner, he thought he heard something. Furtive footsteps, a faint rustle in the undergrowth. Too soft to be certain, yet enough to chill his seasoned hunter's blood. The window stood open. Surprised, he climbed through, striking a match to light a candle. The flame revealed a scene that froze him where he stood. Against the wall crouched his wife, clutching their child to her chest. At the sight of him she rose, not with relief, but with a terrible, hollow laughter. It rang out long and loud, mechanical, joyless, the sound of madness unchained. He reached for her instinctively. She placed the infant in his arms. The child was lifeless, crushed in the desperate strength of its mother's embrace. That was the night's horror. Yet not all of it was told to Jenner Brading, nor even known to Irene Marlowe herself. When her tale ended, the sun had slipped below the horizon, and twilight shadows deepened in the valley. For a long while Brading sat in silence, waiting for her to tie the story back to their conversation, but she said nothing. Her face was turned away, her hands opening and closing in her lap as though moved by some will not her own. At last he spoke. "It is a dreadful story, Irene, but I do not understand. You call Charles Marlowe your father, that much I know. I have seen the sorrow in him, the weight of years beyond his age. But forgive me, you said that I am insane," she answered, her voice flat, her body motionless. "But you said the child was dead, not mad." "Yes, that child. I am the second. I was born 3 months later. My mother gave her life to give me mine." Brading was stunned, his thoughts scattered. He reached toward her restless hands, but something, an instinct he could not name, stopped him. He remembered, dimly, that he had never truly wished to touch her hand at all. Her voice broke the silence once more. "Tell me, is it likely that one born of such a night, of such a curse, could ever be as others are, could ever be sane?" Brading sat in silence, his mind racing. A new thought was forming, half theory, half suspicion. Perhaps Irene's tale was not the echo of truth, but the fevered invention of a troubled mind. The land was still raw, the wilderness pressing close. Hunters still roamed with rifles and trophies, and stories of beasts prowling the night were common currency. Lately whispers had spread of a panther peering through windows after dark, a tale repeated, embroidered, and finally printed in the local paper. Brading had dismissed it then, but now he could not ignore how closely it mirrored Irene's confession. Could it be that her imagination, fed by solitude and fear, had seized upon the rumor and woven it into her own tragic history? He thought of her life, shut away with her father, shunning visitors, never seen after nightfall. A mind so isolated might easily ignite, and once aflame, consume itself in madness. The realization pained him, but he could no longer deny it. Irene was not cursed. She was insane. With a heavy heart, he tried to speak, his voice hesitant. "Irene, dearest, tell me. Do not be offended, but tell me." She cut him off, her voice suddenly fierce. "I have told you already. We cannot marry. What more is there to say?" Before he could answer, she sprang to her feet and slipped away into the trees, gliding like a shadow toward her father's house. Brading rose, meaning to follow, but stopped. He stood staring into the gloom where she had vanished. Then, suddenly, his blood ran cold. From the darkness, for the briefest instant, two eyes gleamed back at him, eyes that burned with a wild, unnatural light. He staggered, stunned, then shouted with all his strength as he plunged into the woods, "Irene! Irene, look out! The panther! The panther!" Through the fringe of trees, Brading had seen Irene vanish into her father's door, her gray skirt swallowed by the darkness. No panther had shown itself, yet the image of those gleaming eyes haunted him long after. Brading's own cottage stood at the town's edge, its back pressed against the forest. Though he boarded at the hotel and kept his office there, the little house was his badge of respectability, a symbol of success, if not of home. And it was whispered, with cruel certainty, that his failed courtship of Irene Marlowe was the reason it remained so empty. His bedroom lay at the rear, its single window opening directly onto the woods. One night, deep in uneasy sleep, he was startled awake by a sound at that window. He could not have said what it was, scraping, rustling, something alive. His nerves jolted, but his hand was steady as it closed around the revolver beneath his pillow. The room was black as pitch. He fixed his gaze on the faint square of the window, waiting. Then, suddenly, they appeared. Two eyes, burning, malignant. Their glow was not of this world, a greenish fire that froze his blood. His heart lurched, then seemed to stop altogether. A coldness swept through him, raising the hair on his neck. He could not have cried out, even if he wished to, but he would not have, even if he could. Brading was no coward. His body trembled, but his will was iron. The eyes rose higher, slowly, steadily, as though the creature itself was lifting into the room. His hand followed, the revolver rising with the same deliberate motion, and then he fired. The gun's flash seared his vision, the thunder of the shot still ringing in his ears. Yet through the haze, Brading thought he heard it, a scream. High, piercing, almost human, yet twisted with something unearthly. The cry of a beast, or of a soul in torment. He leapt from the bed, fumbling into his clothes, revolver still in hand, and burst into the night. From the road, men came running, drawn by the shot. Breathless words were exchanged, and together they searched. The grass beneath the window was flattened, slick with dew, and something else. A trail led away into the undergrowth, winding and broken. One of the men stumbled, rose, and stared at his hands. They glistened red in the lantern light. Blood.
The others recoiled. To face a wounded panther in the dark, unarmed, was more than they dared. One by one, they turned back, leaving Brading alone. Lantern in one hand, pistol in the other, he pressed on into the tangled wood. Branches tore at him, shadows closed around him, until at last he stumbled into a small clearing. There, his courage was rewarded or cursed. The body lay before him, but it was no panther. What he saw that night is not spoken of in detail, save in whispers. Its truth endures only in the village churchyard, carved into a weather-worn stone. And for years afterward, a bent old man could be seen there daily, his face carved with sorrow, keeping vigil at the grave of his strange, unhappy child. Peace to her, peace to him, and perhaps, in that final silence, a measure of reparation.
And thus the story ended. If you liked this journey into the worlds of classic literature, do not forget to support us by subscribing so we can tell you more. And hey, if there's a classic tale you'd love to hear told in this suspenseful style, drop its name in the comments below. Your suggestion might be our next chilling adventure.